A new year, a new agenda for Ohio lawmakers. Welcome to Columbus on the Record. The start of the new year always brings new resolutions, and for new lawmakers and lawmakers in new positions, a new agenda. Governor DeWine likely will keep his resolution to appoint a new U.S. Senator for Ohio. J.D. Vance will resign his seat on or before January 20th when he takes the oath and becomes vice president. Speculation as to who will succeed him has narrowed to two names: Lieutenant Governor Jon Husted and former Ohio GOP Chair Jane Timken. Husted wants to be governor. He has raised millions of dollars to launch a campaign for governor. But it's far from a sure thing that he could win a GOP primary if Trump favorite Vivek Ramaswamy runs. Whoever DeWine picks for Senate must be a Trump favorite. Perhaps that's why, as Cleveland.com first reported, DeWine and Husted went to Mar-a-Lago last month to meet with the president-elect. Julie Carr-Smythe, what is the speculation, the talk as to when DeWine might make this choice and who it might be?
Well, the governor has told us it would be after the first of the year, which obviously it is now. But everything I'm hearing is that J.D. Vance will remain in his position as long as he can, so the 19th or whatever it would be. And, you know, the situation really with Trump getting involved in this is that Vivek is right now an insider in the Trump world and perhaps who Trump wants. And so this, again, is this Republican divide over maybe DeWine wants a more moderate candidate. Maybe he's going to pick someone that Trump wants. And so I think if he can move Husted out somehow of the governor's race and move Vivek in, then that is better for the Trump world.
Jon Husted wants to be governor. There's really no mystery there. But the reality is he might not win. If it's a three-way race with Vivek Ramaswamy, Dave Yost, and Jon Husted, that's even tougher because Husted and Yost would split the establishment vote and Vivek would slide in that way.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of pressure being put on Husted right now that I'm sure the meeting at Mar-a-Lago must have said, that Trump must have said, Vivek is my candidate and I will support him, I will endorse him.
For governor.
For governor. And so the wise move would be to Husted, don't run for governor. And if he doesn't run for governor, then what's the consolation prize? And it's a very good consolation prize. It's a U.S. Senate seat, but I agree with you, Mike. I've heard all along that Jon Husted wants to be governor and has been preparing to be governor. So I don't know what he'll do, but you're right. I think that the running against Vivek and Yost at the same time will be a very difficult uphill battle for him.
Mike, have you ever seen anything like this where the president basically can anoint the next governor of Ohio?
Well, at least not officially. Yeah. No, I've not seen it. And I think if the information you guys are talking about is accurate, that Husted has got to take the appointment. I mean, running for governor, you know, he's waited 8 years with Governor DeWine. I think he may wait another 8 if the Republican wins. And coming from the U.S. Senate, that's not bad. Mm-hmm. Then you talk about the election of 2032. I know that seems like a long way away, but it really isn't. To be an incumbent U.S. Senator is a pretty healthy thing to have.
Yeah. So, back to the meeting at Mar-a-Lago, Herb, do you think that DeWine and Husted got assurances that Trump would endorse Husted if he were to run for Senate?
I think that would have to be part of the deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we do have to recall how Jon Husted got here. You know, he came in, he was very effective and, popular, I guess you could say, state lawmaker. He became a House Speaker, a state senator, then he became the Secretary of State. He was really in good position to potentially beat DeWine 8 years ago or, in that first election. And so DeWine merged with him and they put this together and deferred Jon Husted's dream of being governor for this 8 years with the idea that he would definitely be the next governor. And it's a completely different job. One is executive, one is legislative, one's in Columbus, one's in D.C.
Yep.
And so, it has to be a really tough decision for him.
If you were the Democratic Party trying to rebound in 2 years, who would you rather run against for governor? Vivek Ramaswamy or John Husted? I would say they'd rather run against Vivek, and they would not want to run against John Husted. So in some ways, Donald Trump could be doing the Democratic Party a favor.
2 years in Donald Trump's world, Mike, is a long time. I mean, what assurances do we have that Vivek Ramaswamy is going to be on Donald Trump's good side 2 years from now, a year from now?
Well, I think it's obvious. The answer is we don't.
Yeah.
There's absolutely nothing. One more thing about Houston, if he does that, because of the vice president elect resigning, he's going to have to run again in 2 years, and then again 2 years later. So he's got to win 2 elections before he gets, hopefully, from his perspective, this opportunity to become governor. And again, that's not easy. We're a Republican state now, but that doesn't mean we will be 2 years or 4 years from now. I mean, politics is a gamble.
So if you were to guess, would he take the safe route, John Husted, or would he say, you know what, this is where I'm going to go. I'm going to put all my cards to the middle of the table and go for governor?
Well, I mean, there is this option Mike brings up, which is that he could take the appointment now and then not run in 2 years and go back to running for governor. I mean, anything's possible in politics. I'm with Mike on that.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if Vivek falls out of favor, Husted comes back and runs for governor.
And what does Yost do in all of this?
I think Yost runs regardless. I think he's gone too far. He's planned and regardless of who the candidate is, regardless of who President-elect Trump supports, I think David Yost will run for governor.
When you think about this, did Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, have to go to Joe Biden to ask his permission to appoint Alex Padilla to succeed Kamala Harris? Herb?
I don't know.
Rod Blagojevich, I'll guarantee you, did not go to Barack Obama to get his permission to announce his successor. I mean, this really is incredible what the Republican Party has become now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, really everyone walks on eggshells and listens hard for any hints or suggestions from Donald Trump. And, it puts a lot of our establishment Ohio politicians, career folks who Ohio voters are well familiar with, like a John Husted or Frank LaRose, it puts them in a bind because these are folks who basically as young men young men and women came into politics and then sort of did their time in the old-fashioned sense of taking lower offices and moving up, and then their careers just get thrown into a tizzy by this.
Yeah, our senators are Bernie Moreno and J.D. Vance, who 9 years ago, nobody knew who they were,
Right.
outside of their families and maybe neighborhoods.
Tell me what the economy is going to look like in 2 years. And if it looks bad, I think that would be something that would make a Trump endorsement less influential. As skillful as Donald Trump is in avoiding the responsibility for anything, if the economy tanks, we could have a classic midterm election in which the party out of power makes some gains.
Yeah. All right. Speaking of Vivek Ramaswamy, he's been making news over the holidays, not all of it positive, depending on your perspective. Ramaswamy is co-leading the government spending cutting effort with Elon Musk, of course. Ramaswamy first angered some Trump supporters by saying America needs legal immigrants to fill tech and engineering jobs. In defending this position, Ramaswamy wrote on X, quote, "The truth is our American culture has venerated mediocrity over excellence for way too long." He continued writing that a culture that celebrates the prom queen over the math Olympiad champ or the jock over the valedictorian will not produce the best engineers. He went on from there quite a bit longer in saying that kids should stop watching Saturday morning cartoons and they should stop hanging out at the mall. Herb, I don't think kids are watching TV on Saturday morning or at the mall. They're on their phones. But anyway, is Vivek Ramaswamy right? Have we downplayed the importance of science, technology, engineering, and math for prom queens and football quarterbacks?
He's tone deaf in how he said that. There's certainly a need to strike the balance. if you actually look at higher education, STEM is the big talk, and it's been the talk for a long time. If you look at Congress, it's been STEM. So I think he's out of touch there. But the way he basically described the American population, he didn't quite call us deplorables, but it was really sort of kind of insulting. And I'm not sure that was a smart thing to say it that way. I think he has to say something to the effect, we value all these things, and we better make sure, we should also value people who choose to go into the crafts, to become electricians and plumbers. It was a very elitist kind of statement, which you might expect from him.
Well, he used the word venerate, which most people don't use anyway. But Donald Trump can say that, Mike, but Vivek Ramaswamy can't say that and not get political blowback. Would you say?
Well, I think if Trump said it, he'd get some blowback too. But I frankly disagree with Herb. I didn't take it as elitist. I took it as factual. I believe it basically the essence of it is true. I look at our public school system, and I believe that the numbers were, we talk about closing down the schools, that in, 20 years ago or so, there were like 116,000 students. Now we're down to 46,000. And Columbus, as we all know, is growing. And why? Nobody wants to send their kids to public schools if they can possibly avoid it. Every test I see down through the years, and I'm just reading the newspaper year after year, rates fall about who could read at the 4th or 5th grade level. Math falls at who, and we just figure out ways where we're going to pass everybody anyway. And I think it gets into college for some degree. Something I read a year or a month ago or so said that, don't hold me to these exact numbers, but in all of the universities in the country, like 80% or 70% of the grades they issue are A's. It's just everything has changed, and I think it has hurt the country as a whole. So I basically agree with what he said. That you sit on, look at the television that we get. A lot of the television. I mean, to me, it's geared for people, 6th or 7th grade educations, and that's what we have.
How does this play in Ohio? Should Ramaswamy run for governor, being in support of immigrant tech jobs, for tech companies like Intel, or even for like Nationwide Insurance, which uses folks in their IT department?
Right, because the context of this was he was making the case for H-1B visas for immigrants, which is interesting given that I think a lot of Ohio voters chose Trump because of his stance on, like a very tough stance on border security and allowing immigrants into the country. That's a pretty difficult needle to thread for the average American voter. It's like, well, we are for closing the border and keeping immigrants out, but we are also for bringing these immigrants in because they're smarter than you, which is basically how it came off.
Yeah, illegal versus legal, merit-based versus just people wanting to live here without.
Going back decades in higher education, especially in the sciences and engineering, higher education has always depended upon international graduate students from the East, graduate students from Europe. So this is not so much a new thing. And actually what Vivek is really saying here is we do have a need for additional people. And even when we graduate more engineers in the United States or in Ohio, those undergraduate engineers with a BS degree, they don't go on to graduate school. Why? Because they can get a fantastic job right away. And why go on for a master's or PhD? And yet, if you really want to do the research that needs to be done, you have to have advanced training. So I don't quite agree with you, Mike, in terms of how bad this situation has always been there. And we've always had to rely upon international visitors, if you will, whether they're students or immigrants or whatever, to help. So I think Vivek is right about that. But again, the whole thing is said so clumsily. I mean, it's such a contradiction to what the president-elect has been saying, and it's also the way he's talked about the rest of us I still think is insulting.
All right, let's get to our next topic. Ohio lawmakers start over on Monday with a new session. Governor DeWine this week signed the last remaining lame duck laws, including one that allows police departments to charge $750 for police body cam video. Coming up in the next session, lawmakers must redraw congressional districts. They are expected to resume work on a bill that would ban diversity training on public college campuses and mandate colleges some curriculums to change. It's an effort, they say, to give conservatives more of a voice on campus. And with all this is the turn of the calendar, the 2025 calendar, and candidates are already announcing plans to run in the 2026 cycle, which will feature a lot of seats, including, as we've said, the governor's seat. Julie Carr Smythe, to put a bow on the lame duck, any real surprises there from Governor DeWine? No major vetoes?
So far, no. He had that huge pile of bills on his desk, and he was expected to potentially not support one of the bills that has not yet, as of today, come through on the
Parental rights for
parental rights. I
notifying
apologize.
students
Right.
if they
Yeah,
talk about
and
sex
so
in class. Yeah.
I suspect he'll probably sign that. He wasn't planning on signing the other one on medical freedom because he said that was going to inhibit regulation. And so, I think he signaled pretty well what he was going to do.
Plus, he might have chances of getting overridden on these things is there as well. He doesn't want that fight right now.
Right. I mean, because I think he's going to be in a better position with the next legislature. The last couple standoffs he's had with them, Matt Huffman, who was Senate president, was on his side, or he was on Matt Huffman's side. Mm-hmm. And then it was the House Speaker who kind of blocked that. Well, now Matt Huffman's the House Speaker, and the new Senate president, I think, is going to be more amenable to three deals between the three.
So what's the number one priority looking forward, would you say?
Well, they have to deal with redistricting, and I think they want to deal with the marijuana laws as well. They wanted to get some kind of tweaking done there in terms of taxation and potency and that kind of thing.
Herb, redistricting, the issue just never goes away. It's always with us, and it has to be this year because the last congressional map, not the state legislative map, but the congressional map only got Republican support, so by law, by amendment, it has to be redrawn in 4 years. Here we are. What do we expect this new map to look like?
It won't look much different than the current map. But one of the questions is, would there be any serious attempt to change the method by which the districts are drawn? And so, I think the governor threw out last year the notion of an Iowa-like commission, and that might be a possibility. Except I think the House Speaker would say, okay, an Iowa commission might be okay if we allow the legislature to override whatever the commission comes up with. So that's a meaningless reform or whatever. So I assume we're going to go forward this year with the current system and come up with something, and the Republicans will still try to change a few districts, maybe next time to get, Marcy Kaptur or get Amelia Sykes. But it's been amazing that, in fact, with all the gerrymandering, the Democrats have actually held their own.
Yeah, Democrats now have 5 seats. Republicans have 10. Now, the Democratic seats tend to be a little more competitive, a little less safe. So the question is, given what happened with the redistricting amendment, it lost badly. So there's no incentive for Republicans to really change the system, but there could be another system down the road. So if they gerrymander too much, it would give fuel to that fire. What do they do, do you think?
Oh, Mike, I think, like you said earlier, gerrymandering is never going to go away, and it isn't. I noticed the thing Herb said about Iowa, and perhaps the Republicans want to add something we could override. There's a comment from the League of Women Voters, very liberal people, saying, well, Iowa, no, that's not going to work either because they want the upper hand, the same as the Republicans want the upper hand. This is not an idea, in my judgment, that everybody wants to be fair. Nobody wants to be fair. The Republicans want an advantage. The Democrats want an advantage. But since the Republicans are in, the Democrats can say, they're consolidating power, themselves and not to the people. Well, the people just voted overwhelmingly to take it away from the civilian hands and give it back to the legislature. So it's not going to go away, and I don't know what the answer is because it looks like this divisiveness that we have across the country still here, and nothing's going to change it.
Any kind of fair redistricting reform would still result in Republican majorities in the congressional delegation and in the state legislature. Why? Because there are more Republicans, and also because the way the Republican vote is distributed in the state is more advantageous to Republicans. Too many Democrats are concentrated in small geographical areas. So any kind of reform should actually result in Republican majorities. The question is really the size of the majorities. And of course, what we have right now are supermajorities. And I'm not sure Governor DeWine would, might not be happier with Republican majorities that are not supermajorities.
All right, our final topic. In 1976, Jimmy Carter narrowly won the White House over President Gerald Ford. Carter won Ohio, but by just 11,000 votes, or about 1/4 percentage point. And to illustrate how things have changed, Ohio had 25 electoral votes back then. Now it has 17. And Ford trounced Carter in Franklin County by 14 percentage points. It was much different 4 years later when Reagan won Ohio in the presidency easily. Of course, we remember Jimmy Carter this week because the former president died Sunday at the age of 100. While he struggled as president, he excelled in his pursuits after he left the White House. Herb Asher, how do you remember Jimmy Carter?
As a very, very decent, honorable, moral person, as a person whose presidential record was mixed, but he had some tremendous successes. But he was ultimately defeated because the economy was in shambles. Gasoline prices had soared. Mortgage rates were high. Inflation was high. But if you talk about two of his major accomplishments, the Camp David Accords between Israel and Egypt, imagine the Mideast today and all the instability there if Egypt and Israel were at each other. I mean, that would have just been calamitous. And the Panama Canal, that was a very controversial thing. That's one of the things he was able to get through the Senate. And it turned out, people argued against it. He said, how can the Panamanians take care of the canal? And what if some foreign power gets control of the canal? Well, that hasn't happened. Yeah. And if that had not been approved, you'd have had protests all over Central and South America saying the colonial power is still there. That would have been very unstable.
Looking at Ohio, Mike, you were coming into office in 1980 as prosecutor. So at the end of Carter's run and beginning of Reagan's run, Franklin County, dark blue Franklin County, trounced Carter in 1976. That shows you how times have changed. What's Carter's legacy here in Ohio, do you think?
Well, I agree with everything Herb said. I mean, he was just a wonderful man, which I think is proven not when he was president, not that he was a bad person, he's never been a bad person, but what he's done afterwards. These were just not candid appearances with the media there to snap a picture of him with his hammer in his hand. He did it year after year after year after year. He was genuinely a fine man, and I think one thing that Herb did mention that hurt him as president, again, something he had no real control over, was the hostages in Iran. And, they did try, which took some guts to do it. It didn't work out very well, and he got blamed for that, which is probably unfair, too. But he had a lot of things he just couldn't control, and Reagan was Reagan, and, people liked him. And but I look more at Carter and what he did afterwards, and he was just an exemplary human being.
Julie, Carter said, "I'll never tell a lie," followed Watergate, which I think the American people wanted to hear after that. And he did tell the truth, and it hurt him.
Yes.
He would tell the honest truth. Do you think politicians, because of what happened to Jimmy Carter, are less likely to tell at least the whole truth, or as bluntly as Jimmy Carter did?
Well, I don't know if that's all his fault.
Yeah.
I think that it ushered in this era of sort of consultant politics where people, they look at the polls and they talk to their professionals. They're building their career on the off times rather than legislating. And, I think some of that is just watching by other predecessors' trial and error. I remember being young when Carter was president, and just flipping off the light switch because of Jimmy Carter, because he said save energy, and I mean, it was just little stuff that he was trying to make people think and be a better person.
About 15 seconds.
He changed the process by which people run for president. The fact that he actually went to Iowa, the peanut farmer, one-term governor of Georgia, came in first in Iowa, then to New Hampshire. That path has been copied by so many other people and has elevated Iowa and New Hampshire even more importance than they deserve.
All right. Time now for our final off-the-record parting shots. Mike Miller, you're up first.
Well, how things have changed in Columbus in the last 3 or 4 weeks. Thank goodness for the University of Tennessee and the University of Oregon, because it has completely flipped the way people feel, and neither side was right on it. But it's been great. I hope they continue and win the championship on January 20th.
All right. Herb.
A friend of mine called me from California saying that he's fed up with California, high taxes, regulation, whatever, and is thinking about moving. And so I said to him, well, why don't you think about Ohio? And he said, Ohio? That's simply a cold Mississippi. and I said, what do you mean? He said, well, culturally, you're fighting all these battles that are really not central to governing. And I said, well, there are other things going on here.
And we're getting warmer. Julie.
I'm going to say I have a very strong feeling that we're going to see the governor come out against the death penalty very soon. He gave us some hints toward that at his year-end breakfast, and obviously he's not executed a single person on his watch. So keep an eye out for that.
Does he commute sentences like Biden did? That's the question, I guess.
Right.
We'll watch. Anyway, my final thought is this week marks the 19th anniversary of this show. And the three people at this table have been with us for those 19 years, as have you, most of you who are watching. So thanks to these folks, thanks to everyone who's on this show, and thanks to you all for watching. We're on to year 20. We'll see what happens. That is Columbus on the Record for this week. Continue the conversation on Facebook, and you can watch us anytime at our website. We didn't have one of those 19 years ago. Or YouTube, or the PBS video app. We didn't have those either. For our crew and our panel, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.